Space, the geographer's frontier. And these are the episodes of Coffee and Geography, its ongoing mission to explore exotic new locations, to seek out inspiring people and innovative ideas, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. I am Alistair Hamill, geography teacher from Northern Ireland, and this is your host, Kit Rackley.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Coffee and Geography podcast, and we are returning up north for this discussion for the Climate Ambassador Special, because I am joined by Ray Butchart. Is it Butchart or Butchart?
That's correct. Yep, that's very good.
So Ray, because you're based up there near York and near Hull, so it's nice to have someone from the Humberside area. Yeah,
nice to be on board.
Absolutely. So Ray is retired after 22 years in the Royal Air Force, particularly aircraft engineering, and 31 years in the rail industry. So there's a lot of interesting discussions there. And you've been scuba diving for 58 years, and you have a really deep interest in marine biology, and you've worked with many universities with that. So that's going to be such a rich vein of discussion, I think. But before we get going, Ray, what have you brought to the Coffee and Geography Coffee House? What drink have you got with you today?
Oh, it's a percolated coffee.
Percolated coffee. Is there any particular type or brand that you go for?
Yeah, it's called Sangro, and it actually comes from Bonaire. We brought it back with us. You know, the island of Bonaire is about 50 miles north of Venezuela. So it's one of the islands of the Caribbean, the Dutch Antilles, and it's nicknamed the ABC Islands because you have Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao.
That makes total sense. Yes. I found a really, really interesting... I actually learned a very interesting fact about Curacao just the other day, that apparently that was used as the testing base to eradicate... I forgot the name of the fly now, but there's this flesh-eating fly that they released hundreds and thousands, if not millions of castrated flies. So when they mated with the females, they didn't produce any offspring. So therefore, eventually, the fly would die out. But apparently, they were a massive problem in Central and Southern America, and they used that island to basically genetically engineer the fly out. And when they were successful, they then deployed it across Central America. So I've forgotten the name of the fly now. It's I only read about this the other day. So yeah, that's really interesting that you've only just come from that area. So this leads me quite naturally onto the next question, Ray, because you've quite clearly got a rich kind of experience of things that you've done, and you're up there near Hull. So the question I always like to ask people, Ray, is based on where you've been in the world, quite like your travels, like to the Caribbean or places like that, and of course the fact that you're up in Hull in Humberside. What has made your identity today? So how would you describe Ray today on the basis of the places he's lived and the places he's experienced?
I think it's trying to give other people a flavour of parts of the world that they may not have visited, but I have, and also stimulate some interest into what activities you can do that don't necessarily require a lot of money or work, but can give you a lot of good results. And you can be an assistant in anything for that, whether it's climate ambassadors or whether you're dealing with marine biology or even just walking in the woods. And you observe things, and that's the information you take with you.
Where would you say is the most profound observation, and therefore you may have had in your life, which has stuck with you ever since?
Oh, no, that is a deep question, that one. I think I would have to think about that one for a while, because really, if I look back on my time from when I started, shall we say, I was at school in Singapore. So I had my education, a lot of it was in Singapore. Then I joined the Air Force. So I have Singapore, Malaya, Ceylon, Cyprus, the Mediterranean, across the Caribbean, Scandinavia. So I've got
Wow.
quite a lot of areas. And I think each one has its own wow factor, shall we say. Because at the end of the day, it's what you see and what you observe rather than just look at it and say, yeah, okay, it's a scene. But it's not. There's a lot behind each one. And therefore, when people ask me, what's your best dive you've ever had? I say, they've all been good dives because it's what you see and what you make of it. There's quite a few people who don't seem to make anything of it. They expect to jump out and attack them, shall we say. Whereas I look at it and say, you're hiding somewhere. Where are you? And then go looking for it.
Yeah. One of the most profound things I heard from another person, and I think it sounds like you can identify with this, is I had the I was very, very fortunate a few years ago to speak to the Indian actor Hadil Hussain. And if folks who don't know who he has done many big roles in India. But his biggest role was probably playing the father in Life of Pi. And he told me this story of this time when to prepare for a role which was very nature orientated, stuff like that. He took himself to a 3-month no tech retreat somewhere in India, and just that's it, kind of effectively locked himself away at this retreat. And he said his observation, the thing that really struck him and really informed his role, was he found this tree in the resort that was really old, a very old tree. And he said he used to go and sit by it for like at least an hour, if not longer, every single day. And he got to know that tree in a very deep level that he said, I observed, I kind of came to the conclusion that this tree is like my primordial grandmother in the way that it nurtures me, it provides for me, it can speak its history to me, and I think that is a great example of the difference between that's a pretty view and really deeply observing and connecting with something. So you must have, I mean, I'm very envious. You must have had a wealth of those kind of experiences, I imagine.
Oh, yes. And when you look at each one, it is a case of looking and not seeing. The trees for the woods, all these sort of expressions.
Yes,
you've got to let yourself go and your imagination go. And you turn around, I say, like I've just done some diving, and we came across dives. And okay, the visibility at times wasn't as I expected, but we came across creatures that we'd never seen before.
Yeah.
I mean, one of them, and I took a photograph, was a 3-foot southern stingray. Now, I've never seen one in all my years. So this thing is about 3 foot across. 3 meters. It was big.
Wow. Yeah, wow.
Yeah. And we just stopped and looked at it and watched it. And you could see its eyes moving as it was watching us. And we just stayed there for quite a few minutes and did nothing, but sort of knelt down on the bottom and just watched.
Oh.
As if you're trying to say to it, well, are you going to move or are you not going to move? And it didn't move. It stayed there. So we were pleased for that.
That's
so
amazing.
These are the sort of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that because then you also get a deeper sense of we're in their territory, know, and we need, and the respect we as an individual, but also clearly, obviously, as a human race need to give to these creatures is absolutely about, because there's an intelligence in that, and I think you get such a deeper appreciation in how everything connects together, because if you watch and you look long enough, you get to see what that ray may do with its surroundings, or how it might interact with the creatures around it, and of course you can watch a video on that or read that in a textbook, but that's so ephemeral, and I don't think it causes a deep connection. I think I've had a fair few in my time, but I think the one time where I actually took I almost like had to catch my breath was I'm quite fortunate that my in-laws have a house out in Bozeman, Montana, in a glacial valley just outside of Bozeman, Montana, and there was a period of time where I was lucky enough to go there almost every year, and one year I took a group of high school students, just 12 high school students out there for a trip to the Yellowstone National Park area. But I got up the first morning after we arrived, and the kids were all still asleep, all jet lagged and everything. And I just went for a walk around the house, just around the area, and I heard the sound of these sandhill cranes. The distinct. I'm not going to try and mimic them, but and I heard these sandhill cranes, and it was a familiar sound because they pair for life, and they also nest in the same space every year. They return to the same place and they pair for life. So I knew of them already. I've seen them before, but something about them in this instance was pretty. It took my breath away because they were in a tree just, I don't know, about maybe 100 meters away. And then they took flight together, and their wings were in total synchronicity, and their calls to each other was almost like they were having a conversation. And because it was maybe first thing in the morning, it was all very still, it was very quiet, it was very fresh, all of this, and the mounting air was so clear, and you could see for miles down towards the Spanish Peaks, which is to the south of Bozeman. And just at that moment, I just lost my breath. It was such a profound experience. And I've seen those sandhill cranes before, and I've seen that view before, but that was the first time I felt I really probably experienced a moment whenever I've been to Bozeman. So, yeah, and I think it's a shame, isn't it? Life is such fast paced now that I just think one of the reasons why we've got such a mental health crisis is because we've lost our connection to nature, and one of the reasons is because we just don't slow down.
That's right. Everyone's traveling around, whereas in our time, in fact, way back in the sort of 50s and 60s, we didn't have the transport. So we walked, or if we were lucky, with a bicycle. And when you walk, it doesn't matter, go through trees or field areas or even just down an ordinary road, you hear more, you see more.
Yes.
Yeah, life is... They're going far too fast, and unfortunately, there's too much electronics in the world, and they won't come off their phones.
Yes, indeed. And my challenges with my kids is to, okay, all right, they're so attached. How can I integrate technology into getting them to experience the world? So I try to use things like the Merlin bird app, where we can identify bird song and stuff like that. But you're right, it's tricky, and I think I haven't been a high school teacher now for, what is it, 2025. So it's getting on to, crikey, it's getting on to 10 years now. And I'd hate to be fighting this fight as a teacher now. It was bad enough when I was a teacher, but now when it's also you're beyond connected, and everything's now artificial intelligence and virtual reality and stuff like that. It's quite interesting, what a challenge I would want to overcome there. So with the fact that you're in Hull, are you someone that's born and raised in Hull, or is that a place? So clearly, you say you've travelled all over the place.
Yes.
Do you have a distinct identity then? So if it's not Yorkshire or anything?
No.
That's amazing. That's fantastic.
Because both my parents were Scottish, but
Okay.
I was born in down in Trowbridge in Wiltshire.
Okay.
And then my father he went back to Dundee. So I was only small then. And then we ended up in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka, yep.
For about a couple of years. Then we came back. We came back to Doncaster area. And then from the Doncaster area, we went to the Far East again. Went to Singapore. My father, because he was in the forces as well, he had 2 moves. So I had... overall, I've had 11 schools by the time I was 17.
Wow.
So it does make a disjointed education because you recap a lot and you miss a lot because of the timetabling.
Yeah.
with different schools. But anyway, we went out there. So I moved schools in Singapore. Then we came back to this area, actually. I ended up at Hornsey School on the coast for about 6-8 weeks. Then we moved again, and I then went to Beverley School for 4 months. And then from Beverley School, back out to the Far East again.
Wow.
But because there was no schooling in the Malaya area I was in, I had to travel down to Singapore as a boarder and stayed in boarding school in Singapore.
Wow.
And that was the start of me really looking at myself and looking fending for myself. Because up to then, I've been with my family. But when you go to boarding school, you effectively have to learn to look after yourself. And you can develop your own traits. One of the traits I liked, because I've always had a fascination for water, was the ability to start snorkeling and then pick up scuba diving.
Nice.
And that's what we did. And eventually I said, I was never going to be an academic. I knew that by the age of 17. I wasn't going anywhere fast. But I did have the opportunity in Singapore, to work with a school who was working with a borstal of schoolboys. And I used to go as a maths tutor.
Okay.
To borstal, and I would teach them basic sums in a borstal. They were Chinese lads. And at the back of the room was this big burly guard in case they decided to attack me.
Oh.
But they didn't, because it was a borstal. And I had a great time actually teaching them sums and seeing the results of them learning education. And I did that until I left the school, and I joined the Air Force and took up a whole new lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, that links us quite nicely onto that next chapter, because involving quite a bit of maths, of course, is engineering. And you were it says here you were an aircraft engineer in the RAF. So
yes,
I mean that. Yes, tell us a little about that experience and how did that add to your already rich kind of like experience of going places or experiencing different people in different parts of the world?
Well, I signed up actually for the RAF in 1969. So it's going back a few years. And I went to RAF Changi in Singapore to enroll, and they accepted me. So I had to fly back on my own to Britain to do an apprenticeship for 2 years, RAF Holton. And then that's where I met all these other people from all the world, and we were together as one group. There was actually 400 of us on the intake. So they'd come from all over Britain and other places. And that's where you have to learn how to gel, how to help each other. Stay away from the trouble if you can, but it didn't always work. So we did that, and whilst I was there, I started to do scuba diving again, and I became a training officer in the local club. And we used to go up to various places like Stony Stanton, which is now Stony Cove, as far as the dive centre, inland diving. And we'd also go to Valley, down into Hampshire, near Durdle Door and all those sort of places.
Classic,
and, and started doing diving. And that's when we started looking at marine creatures. What did you actually see? How did they behave? And so on. And that's what started me really looking at not just diving, but using diving as a method, a tool to do observation and marine biology, because that's what it's about. Diving is not a skill that you use with marine biology and say, I've got this. It's only a tool. It enables you to go underwater and stay underwater. And as long as you stay safe with all the rules, you can then make use and switch off to the fact you're diving and just observe, record, and do so on. And that's what it was. It started doing things like that.
Yeah. There's someone called Mel Hersham who I spoke to them on the Coffee and Geography podcast as well. I think this was either the year before last, I think. And folks, I strongly recommend you listen to Mel because they have done similar work to that in terms of, you know, they're training to be a marine biologist as well. And I can't remember exactly what the details were, but they were working with, I think, some kind of project for the Environment Agency or something like that, and off the coast of Essex, on those lines. And I need to catch up with them. But it's what's really interesting though is that you go into this career with the RAF and you end up with having this group going diving, and it just so was it. Did it become almost like a club for a group of you, for a group of engineers to go out and do that? Yeah. Okay.
So they were all ranks. And the thing with it is when you're diving, even the lowest rank might be the senior diver because they've got the most experience.
Okay.
So the senior people actually have to take their directions and instructions from a junior person. Some do it well, some don't take kindly to it, but that's another matter. And then all the way through my service career, I've been all over the place, and I joined clubs, and I reached the level at one stage where I became the diving officer for all the RAF divers.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I was the diving officer for it. So yes, that was did that for a year, and what an experience it was.
Right. I got a question for you then, because I think, and I must admit, I'm one of these as well. So I think there's a lot of people out there who like to put the armed forces, the uniformed forces, into boxes. So the army, you do this. The Air Force, you do this. The Navy, you do this. But that what you just said is perfect for me. Tell us, and people listening who are curious and maybe dispelling the myths, why would the RAF need folks who can dive? Wouldn't that be the Navy's job?
It would normally. However, the Navy are scattered far and wide. You've got the submarine service, you've got the ships, you've got the fleet air arm, so you've got the helicopters and such like. But what you've got to look at is, and I was part of the team, the RAF actually had a search and salvage team.
Makes sense.
Which I was a part. And their job was, if an aircraft actually goes into the water and they're going to recover it, we are the people who are skilled with the aircraft to know how to make it safe.
Of course, yeah.
And with my different aircraft and helicopters and whatnot I worked with, I became then tied in as part of the team. I was also a boat handler, with a compressor operator. So those features, the diving, were like bolt-ons. They were the standards. But then I said, well, I've worked with the Vulcan bomber, Canberras, Hunters, and so on. So if any of these go in, I was able to say, right, I could go down there. I could put the pins in the seats to make sure they don't eject. We can switch off systems. We can isolate. We can monitor. And if somebody is actually listening and is interested in aircraft recovery, the RAF Hendon Museum, North London, actually has a Halifax bomber from the Second World War in it.
Right.
Now, this was recovered from Norway, a lake called Lake Hocklingen, way back in the early 70s. And I was a diver on the team that raised it, and we brought it back into Britain. So we recovered it from 100 feet because we were actually engineers, so we knew a lot about the safety of the aircraft and all the rest of it. And we raised it, brought it back onto the surface, and the RAF shipped it back, and it's in the museum now, and it sits in the museum. And if you go on to Google the RAF Hendon Museum, you'll see a picture of it. And I was on the team that raised it in the 70s.
Wow. That's amazing.
And we were all RAF people for it. We did have a couple of scientists to help us, but that was mainly to do with environmental areas. They were worried about fuel and oil and that sort of thing. So we had to make sure that everything was safe as best as possible because we didn't want to contaminate the lake.
Right. That's amazing. I want. Have you heard of? You surely have heard of the TV show Thunderbirds, the Jerry Anderson. Have you heard of Jerry Anderson? Silly question. For folks, you must be really interested in that. Well, folks listening, if you're from the UK, you probably have heard of it. If you're not, look it up. So there's one episode. I actually would like your opinion on this, your take on this, right? There's one particular episode where the Fire Flash, which is like this ultrasonic commercial jet, futuristic jet, folks, because Thunderbirds is set in like the 2050s or something like that, and it's Super Mario Nation, so it was all like models and puppets and things like that. Yeah. This was a show from the 1960s, right? And I've got models all over the place. So I'm just showing Ray on the camera, folks. It's my Thunderbird 2, which is just on my desk here. And there's
Which
one
pod
episode.
Have you got?
Oh, that's the what pod? That's pod 4 because it's got Thunderbird 4 in it, which is coming to my point. So there's one episode where the Fire Flashes, they didn't know at the time, but it keeps getting sabotaged and it keeps ending up disappearing and then falling into the ocean. There's one where it crashes into the ocean and it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and so they send Gordon in Thunderbird 4 in the submarine to go and rescue Fireflash, and he must know a lot about Fireflash, all the engineering of that aircraft and stuff like that, because what he does, he uses the lasers of Thunderbird 4 to cut off the engines at the top, and for somehow that miraculously makes the Fireflash float to the surface so they can rescue it. But I mean, engineering accuracy probably not so much, but great storytelling nevertheless. So we'll call you the Gordon Tracy then. So Ray Gordon Tracy Butchart, I think. So let's stick with marine biology then, because we'll go back to marine biology because I want to play a game with you now, which is what we call barking up the wrong tree. And barking up the wrong tree is when we give two stories, and listeners, you can play along with this, and you've got to decide which one is the real story and which one is the fake story. So, are you ready for this, Ray? It's marine biology linked, so you might get this one right. Okay, so the first story is regarding a 2013 documentary from the Discovery Channel. So it says here, in a groundbreaking marine discovery, Discovery Channel's Shark Week investigation, Megalodon, the monster shark lives, revealed evidence that the prehistoric 60-foot predator still hunts in our oceans. The documentary featured chilling footage of a colossal shark demolishing a fishing vessel off of South Africa, and sonar scans tracking a massive heat signature deep near the Cape of Good Hope. Marine biologists confirmed that the creature's size and behavior matched fossil records of, I might get this wrong, Caracolles megalodon, a species thought to be extinct for 1 million years. Scientists warn that this apex predator now stalks uncharted depths, rewriting history as we know it. Okay, so no comment yet. Just think of it. That's story one. Okay, so story number 2 is about octopuses, and we were talking about intelligence earlier and intelligence of creatures. So this is all about an octopus who escaped from a New Zealand aquarium. So the daring escape began with a tight squeeze through a gap at the top of his tank. Inky, a common New Zealand octopus at the National Aquarium of New Zealand, must have been meticulously planning his escape for some time. When all the factors were perfect, he flawlessly executed. First dashing 8 feet across the aquarium floor and then shooting down a 164-foot seawater runoff pipe to Hawke's Bay, Inky has not been seen since. This remains the most extreme breakout in aquarium history. The National Aquarium of New Zealand is located on the east coast of New Zealand's North Island in a town called Napier. Staff noticed the escape when they discovered that Inky was missing and that octopus tracks led to an escape path. So What do you think, Ray? Which one is the true one? Which one's the fake one? What's your reasoning? So is it the megalodon shark still exists, according to this Discovery Channel documentary, or is it the Houdini octopus?
Well, let's go back to the megalodon first. There is, shall we say, an opinion by people that such creatures can exist. Now, when you have things like the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest point on Earth in the water, we don't know what's down there, really. But one of the big problems with anything that is down there is if it comes up, because of the lesser pressure, then it will affect the creature.
Yeah,
because they're not designed to be in low pressure areas. They've been exerted on hundreds of bars of pressure, and then all of a sudden they're down to one.
So they would explode from the inside out, wouldn't they?
Yeah, it would actually affect a lot of their organs within this. So, yes, I can see the concept behind it and some of the rationale, but I don't think that's the case. Now, let's go to Inky. I've actually watched several programs to do with octopus and how they genuinely have the capability to reason and to work out problems. One of them was in America, and what was happening was the octopus was getting out and he was going along in the laboratory to other areas and tanks and getting into their tanks and eating some of the creatures. So they'd come back in the morning and find that something was missing for different samples, but also they have the capability of undoing their security. Now, a lot of people used to use the concept of putting just plate glass on top with a weight, but they can actually push with enough force to slide out between them. And because it's virtually a jelly bag in there, they can compress themselves very small through areas, and they can get them out. They can run around on the floor and everything and move. So yes, I would think that probably on the basis of this, Inky is the true one.
Well, I have to say, your reasoning, Ray, you're absolutely correct. It is. That is the true story. Right. So first of all, with the Megalodon one, is that the Discovery Channel documentary was a real thing, but it was a mockumentary. But they didn't, at the time, they didn't disclaim at the beginning of the program it was a fake story. So when it was put onto air, everyone thought it was true. So just to read this out, it says, soon after the film premiered, however, the documentary was swiftly debunked as a fictional production with actors posing as scientists, accompanied by evidence that was completely manufactured. The marine biologist Colin Drake was not a marine biologist, was actually a hired actor named Darren Meyer. It wasn't until the subsequent public outrage that the network added brief disclaimers at the beginning and the end, indicating that the program was fictional. So there you go. So the documentary was a real thing, but it was a mockumentary. Yes. And then you're absolutely right with this octopus one. Inky has not been since. So I actually read the first part of this article from Underwater Photography Guide website, but there's many different corroborating sources. And it says, it continues, it seems Inky is now somewhat of an international sensation. His craft and grit may have made the headlines around the world, but he is clearly not interested in the publicity because he has not made any public appearances since his escape. Marine biologists are less surprised by this behavior, as there have been many cases of octopi escaping through small holes, including escaping jars and escaping from the deck of a boat. So... and you gave another example there. Yeah. And what I love about this particular website, and I'll put a link in the chat, in the description, folks, is that the people have taken pictures of how Inky escaped, so you can actually look at his escape route and what he did to get out. So, which is really, really good, courtesy of the National Aquarium of New Zealand. So, yeah, there you go. You're absolutely spot on.
Yeah, actually, we've done quite some observations of octopus, and what is most fascinating is the rate and types of change to their colors and textures. because they can land onto an object like a rock and they absorb the structure of the outside world around them and become part of the rock. You don't see them. They've disappeared, effectively.
Yeah.
And if they move then to another area, they change again. So we were watching an excellent program on the research of this, and the scientists were observing how many types of change the octopus went through over a period of time. They gave up after 124 changes because it just looks at its environment and changes to it, and it just merges in.
Okay, I think 124 is enough to say it can pretty much adapt to almost anything. Yes. That's amazing. There you go, and all based on observation. So, folks listening, you're either listening because you're a geography nut, you're an environmental science nut, you're a teacher who teaches these kind of, or just a person who loves the natural world. The moral of the story here: observation and respect for these unique organisms that we have all across the world. And this is one of the reasons why I loved teaching geography and I love doing the work that I do now, because what a gift, what a privilege to be doing a job or having a job where it's all about experiencing the natural world and trying to protect it and trying to have everybody appreciate it. So with that in mind, then the last thing we'll chat about then before we finish off is, of course, the Climate Ambassador Scheme. So you've trained as a Climate Ambassador, and you're based up in Hull, so you're under the domain of my wonderful colleague Ruth Green at the University of Leeds for the Yorkshire and Humber Regional Hub. So it's quite clear, like, your passion for the natural world would be a driver. But why in particular do you think climate change and supporting education settings to really do something about climate change, how did that come about? How does your passion for marine biology, for example, maybe link in with that? What could you help the schools with? What could you teach young people about?
Well, I think if I look back first at what I did, because I went to so many different countries and I observed their weather forecasts, their systems, their plantations. You're actually looking at the green plants and such like. You're looking at also what they ate even. You could see what type of foods they get, so the fruits and the vegetables and so on, and the differences you get. And then you start to see, well, where does it come from? So you look at the structure of the food chain, and you follow that through. Now, when you look at geography has, to me, a key understanding of what is the environment of that country. Is it a dusty, sandy one? Is it a cool climate? Does it have mainly snow and ice? So you've got all these conditions, and that relates to what you see. But also it can relate to the products that are developed by nature looking at these things. And every time I went to a country, I would actually look around and see what there was and how it merged, because the geography of a country is not just the population in an area, but it's also how nature itself is surviving when man encroaches into its own areas. So when I look at a lot of the features, I thought, well, yeah, we see this generally on the surface because we can walk around and see. But what about underwater? That was the thing that I wanted to look at. How does it relate? And is there any changes to the water compared with the air? And then we started to see weather patterns and how they affect in that. For example, we observed one of the trips to Bonaire, a dust storm that came in. We were warned about it, how it might affect the visibility. But this dust storm came from the Sahara, and it's been brought across on the weather patterns. Now, if the weather patterns continue more frequently, then more dust will come across, and it then coats the underwater terrain, which then causes things to not grow or slows them down. And things like corals get affected, and they can change the life spectrum. But if a coral changes, a coral reef, then that affects the habitat of the creatures. And they will actually move off into other areas, or they die off because there is lack of food for them. They can't get to what they want. And it is interesting to put it all together, because at the end of the day, you've got the geography, you've got climate, you've got the weather systems, you've got mankind, evolution, because things do evolve as well for it. And it's being able to understand and accept that, as I feel about it, that what you need to do, again, as you and I have both intimated, observe. It's not necessarily all the scientists' work. It's actually the general public. And the more they observe, then somebody says, look, I'd like to do a survey. And you open it up and say, anyone out there who would like to help? And they say, yeah. And it says, well, I'd like you to observe, shall we say, your back garden, trees, plants, and everything, over a period of time. Now, to most people, they go, that's okay to start with, but they get bored with it. But really, we are a short period of time in nature and the world. But we have made some changes to the world. We want to see, really, what the long term is. And you can only get that by continuously monitoring. So when I did my marine biology, I got involved with various universities like Sussex University, Lancaster one, I think I did, it must be about 50 years ago, various things where they started these things. And we started doing marine biology surveys. So as our diving club, it would give us a project, we'd go out, and they said, oh, we're going to look at snails this time, or we're going to look at mollusks, or we're looking at fish or coral or whatever when we went to Ascension. And then we'd feed all that information back to them, and they say, this is superb. I mean, I did one on my own in the Falkland Islands when I went down to do my tour of the Falklands after the war down there. And I set up a diving club with another chap. We got a whole pile of divers, and then we started observing things down there. I contacted the university and I said, look, I've come across this. Here's a photograph of it. What do you make of it? And I got this reply saying, this is so-and-so. We've not recorded that there before. Thank you very much. And it gave them more information for them to work on later. So even if you're only a little cog in the system.
Right, yes.
We require lots of little cogs. That's what it is.
That's an amazing. I love that, because one of my favorite sayings is, when it comes to things like this, environmental change, climate action, stuff like that, we don't want just a few people to try and be perfect. We need everybody to be imperfect, and that kind of it relates in that way to me. It doesn't matter if you feel you're a small cog, if you get taken out of the whole thing, or you're missing, or you're not enabled to move, then there's a whole part of the system that breaks down or can't do without you. So it doesn't matter how small you are, you're a vital part. And I think that's why I absolutely love the Climate Ambassador Scheme, because one individual school and maybe one individual pupil or student or teacher may feel like that they personally are not doing very much, but as a small cog, as part of the bigger cog of their school, they can really make a massive difference. And of course, we know through our climate ambassadors training and stuff like that, is that school then is part of a cog which can translate to 25% of all public service emissions comes from the education estate. So all of a sudden now that's a bigger cog, and then you've got all the procurement, all the logistics, all the things that feed into the school system, the education system. So all of a sudden that tiny little cog, goes
Yeah.
orders of magnitudes difference, and that's why it's amazing to have people like you with the experiences and the perception that you do to be a part of the scheme, because it's so empowering. And I'm speaking as an ex-teacher now. It's so empowering as a young person or someone who feels alone in doing these kind of things when there's a very big issue, to feel like imposter syndrome, that you feel like you're not good enough, or you can't do enough, or you're too bound by the system or whatever. But you are living proof that doesn't matter how much of a small contribution you're making, it really does matter.
Yeah. I started off when I was doing the STEM ambassador schemes. I used to go into school and teach them little projects, not necessarily science, but things like, I said, communication. Now, if I said to you communication, how would you develop a half-hour program on communication?
Yes.
So
well, I
did.
Yeah, I know it's a rhetorical question for me. I could answer it based on my but yeah, to the people listening, that's a great question. How would you?
Yeah. So what I did was I said to them, communication. Everyone has mobile phones, but what happened before the mobile phone? Well, you had landlines. So families had landlines.
Okay.
What about before that? Yeah. And I took them right back to, say, 1600s. I says, where's the communication now? And they went, well, somebody, little lad, said, what about beacons? He says, yeah, they had beacons all around the country, and they would set fire to one, and it set the next place would see it and say, oh, we've got to light ours, and so on. But I says, well, what about ships at sea? There is no beacons out there.
Yeah.
No land. And they went, so he says, we have flags. And they used to communicate by flags.
Semaphore, yeah.
Semaphore. And I explained to him the word semaphore is actually the word of the arm, which is communication.
I didn't know that.
So when you're looking at it, and I said to the teacher about this, she says, right, I'll get them for the next session to make little flags. So they had two sticks, and they made cardboard flags, and they painted them and coloured them as part of their project, because they were only, 6-year-olds and such like, 7-year-olds.
That's fine.
And then I took them out onto the sports field, and I says, have we learnt our communication? And I gave the teacher a page of semaphore, what the letters were. And she got them all to do 2 3-letter words. And I made them go out there, and I put them into pairs, about 10 yards apart, and one person had to use their semaphore flags in positions, and the other person had to be able to read it. And they thought that was fantastic. So that says a lot of modern technology all comes from history.
Yes.
So that's what I did. And then I got involved in green power cars at Hornsey School. And I went to them because I was invited by the headmaster there after a meeting in York. And it was a case of, well, we've got this car. Would you come as a sort of engineering advisor to us? So I sat down with them and looked at the car and looked at this. And I started work with them to show how they could improve it. For example, take the wheel off, you've got a bearing. When was the last time the bearing was cleaned? So you clean up the bearing, you repack it with grease, and it spins far better. So you're making the car more efficient. And then we did this, and then the school said to me, would you like to come into school for 2 days and teach a group of children basic engineering on that? And I did. I pre-adjusted all the paperwork, submitted it for them to assess it. They were happy with that. And I went into school for 2 days, and I taught basic engineering
Love it.
to a classroom.
That's brilliant.
And at the end of it, they all had a certificate on basic engineering. Now, some of those children were only 11 and 12 years old, and they were already attained a certificate in basic engineering. What a start in life.
Kids have got a natural propensity to that. What household doesn't have Lego in it?
Yeah.
Even if it's a small little packet or a big box, don't matter. But, you know, the kind of creations that my kids come up with, they're little engineers, you know. The absolute spot. Oh, Ray, it's a shame I'm running out of time because I could speak to a lot longer. But yeah, that's brilliant. And folks, it's just another example, right? Efficiency, like improving efficiency, keeping maintaining things, you know, they are key to things like driving down towards net zero and reducing carbon. Because if you make things more efficient, you know, well, you've just given a great example with a vehicle and things like that. So you're spot on there. Yeah. So we have to come to an end, unfortunately, now, Ray. So the last thing we're going to do then is I'm going to connect you with our previous guest. Is one of my ambassadors actually here in the east of England, William Buttinger, who is here in the east of England, and he had to talk about a word for 30 seconds and just completely riff on it. And he was given the word forecast by one of the Climate Ambassador national co-leads, actually, Professor Andrew Charlton-Perez. So when I asked Willem after he did his 30 seconds, what would you like to give to the following guest to talk about for 30 seconds? He had a little bit of a think, and he came up with circadian rhythm. So he would like you, Ray, for just 30 seconds, just riff, whatever you like, about circadian rhythm or circadian rhythms. As soon as you start, I'll start the timer and you just keep going until the bell rings. Right.
Circadian rhythms. Mm-hmm. As I understand it, this is the rhythm of mankind and society, how it interrelates with each other. And when we look at this rhythm, we want it to be a smooth operation. However, there are many features in the world that actually interfere with this. And what we've really got to do is to think about how can we improve? How can we stop the interference on that side? Is that the end?
That's great. Even though it's only 30 seconds, it really does get people thinking. You're right. And I tell you what, I mean, I've got 2 young kids and I've got a brilliant job, but it's a big job. I don't really have a circadian rhythm. So, you know, the modern day life, as you know, as we've alluded to in the past, interfering with that. Now, I never ever suggest words to people to give to following guests. There's one you've mentioned where I think would be very, very good for the next guest, but I'm not going to try and lead you. I'm not going to be, introduce any bias here. So for the next person I speak to, Ray, what would you like them to talk about for 30 seconds, do you think? So it could be a single word or a very short phrase.
Well, the word I'm going to give is polyp.
Polyp. Oh, right, yeah, polyp. Yeah, well, that makes sense for marine biology, yeah.
Yes, and that's the word.
Okay, folks, listen in for the next time we have a guest on this podcast is the word polyp. Right. Ray, I've really, really enjoyed this. This has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for your insights. It's one of the best things about this podcast is meeting folks like yourself and connecting and sharing those stories. So, folks, if you like what you hear with Ray, especially if you're based in the Yorkshire and Humberside region, please get in touch with Ruth, my colleague Ruth. So if you go down in the description, you'll see the link to the Climate Ambassadors website. And then if you go to get involved and contact us, you've got all the regional hub emails down there, and you can find Ruth's email there underneath Yorkshire and Humberside. And if you want to get in contact directly with Ray, I'm sure Ray and Ruth can organise that, especially, of course, if you work in a school, because it sounds like Ray's got some stories to tell and some engineering skills to teach. So
I've also got a lot of photographs underwater if they want to see.
Oh, my goodness. I need to come up there. I'll tell you what, Ruth, I'm going to come visit you, right? And then we can meet up with Ray. Ray, thank you so much again. I've really enjoyed this chat.
Not a problem. That's great. You look after yourself now.
You too.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Coffee and Geography, folks. If you're itching to know more about the Climate Ambassadors' awesome work, visit www.climateambassadors.org. Don't forget to follow us on Blue Sky at geogramblings.com and use the CoffeeJogPod hashtag to stay in the loop. Submit your questions for our guests on LinkedIn or Blue Sky with hashtag JogQOverABrew. Keep exploring this amazing world, tackling climate action, and flexing your geography muscles. Stay curious, keep jogging, and keep making waves.